Welcome to the show where we expose new perspectives on our ever-evolving world through the lenses of various industries, cultures, and backgrounds. Our guests are disruptors, united by a common goal to bring their purpose to life. Whether they're from the commercial world or third sector, from the global north or the global south, expect an inspirational journey that will transform your perspective on just what is possible. My name is Philippa White, and welcome to TIE Unearthed. What does it really mean to be human in an age of artificial intelligence? As AI rapidly transforms our workplaces, relationships, and creativity, how do we ensure that we as humans don't lose what makes us unique? Welcome to TIE Unearthed, episode 104. I'm Philippa White, and today we're diving into these big questions with my friend, the brilliant Nathalie Nahai. Nathalie is a best-selling author, keynote speaker, and advisor whose expertise lies at the intersection of psychology, technology, and human behavior. Her books, Webs of Influence and Business Unusual, have shaped the way leaders think about persuasion, resilience, and values in the digital world. She's also a talented artist and musician, someone who truly embodies the fusion of creativity and science. In our conversation, we explore Nathalie's fascinating journey from music to art to psychology and AI. We talk about the promises and pitfalls of artificial intelligence, how it impacts creativity, decision-making, and even our sense of connection. We unpack the dangers of synthetic intimacy, the skills we need to thrive in an AI-driven world, and why human imagination is still our greatest asset. If you're curious about how to navigate AI's rapid evolution while staying true to what makes us human, this episode is for you. Let's get started. Nathalie, thank you so much for joining me on TIE Unearthed. I have been so excited for this episode, and I just am so grateful to you and giving me your time and everything. So thank you.
Well, thanks. I've been looking forward to this too, especially if it's got any connection with, which it will, because it's you, with all of the other conversations that we've had, which have just left me effervescent with ideas and excitement. So yeah, this is a real treat.
And we were talking about this obviously before we pressed record, but I just have to say, it's so amazing when people see that two people need to come together. And a massive thank you to Woody, who just randomly sent the beautiful email saying, you two are souls that just need to be in touch. And he couldn't have been more right. So shout out to Woody if he's listening to this. But yeah, I mean, I just, every time I get on the phone with you or Zoom or whatever, and it's just electric. So yeah, it's just amazing. A couple times ago when we spoke, I was so inspired by your incredible background. You have had such an amazing story, from being an indie singer and, making it almost massively big, but then realizing, no, I'm gonna go somewhere else.
I don't think I was ever going to make it big, but that's very generous of you.
And then you're painting, which is doing well. And you spend this time, you carve out time in your day to do this amazing work, and so creative, and psychology. And you've written now 2 books, I think, or maybe more. I'm not sure. Anyway, it's super inspirational. And I just wonder, can you bring to life your story, but also just like that thread that's brought you to where you are now?
One of the things that I've found a struggle, and also really compelling, if it can be that, which I think it is finding a way to show up in a sense that is integrated and full. So that if you're a tapestry, and I believe we're each, you can take whatever metaphor you like. I like the idea of a tapestry, or like an orchestra, where these different aspects and qualities of ourselves come into play together. And my intention for a long while has been, how do I get the whole orchestra to play together so, the timpani isn't left by himself in the back, or the flautist isn't taking over. And this has been a struggle for many years. And when I was very young, the song that I was most attracted to was creative. It was music and it was art. Art was the first love that I had. And the second love came through music. And I was trained in violin from the age of 3. My parents took me into Suzuki because my mum had been trained in piano and she loved having an instrument. Very musical. She has a beautiful voice. And I went kicking and screaming to lessons. I didn't like Suzuki. It was all Baroque music. It was really hard. I was good enough, but I was never great. And I found it really painful. But it gave me access to a love of music and to internalizing how to harmonize. And so I could access that world. And so even though my first love was drawing and painting, when I was about 16 or so, I fell in love with someone who was an amazing artist and musician and decided to teach myself guitar. So I was like, well, I'm not going to have someone tell me how to learn. Like, I've got quite an anti-authoritarian streak in me. And so that was my pathway to folk music. So singing and guitar. And I recorded, and in my 20s, I toured in the States and small scale, but I recorded a couple of albums. And I went to psychology because I had an A-level teacher who just was extraordinary. And I stumbled on psychology and she inspired me. And my parents suggested, look, there isn't that much money to be made in the arts unless you're really lucky. Why don't you have a backup just in case? And you can always blend the things. So actually, this is a really good idea. And they were really generous. They gave me the ability to go to university. I did psychology, mostly really enjoyed it. And then went to Central St. Martin's, which was my goal. I did a year, which was great, started the degree, and I got so bored. I think I need to be stimulated in a kind of an intense, that sounds a bit naughty, but I need to be stimulated intensely. Otherwise my attention just drifts. And so I know this is probably a bit too risque for this kind of, it's because I'm excited.
It's not, keep going, keep going.
My naughty self is coming out. It's the 4-year-old on the timpani. So basically I ended up leaving CSM. I was like, this is just not scratching the itch. So then I ended up somehow deciding to give the music a bit more of a shove. I learned how to design and develop websites so that I could do my own music website, ended up freelancing in web design, then ended up meeting people in the co-working scene in like 2010 in London where it was kicking off. And someone asked me about synthesizing my studies with psychology with entrepreneurship. And so then it got me thinking, what else can I synthesize this with? And because I was doing web design and behavioral science was really big at that moment, Kahneman was just writing, just publishing, Thinking Fast and Slow, and it was a really exciting scene. I was like, well, why don't I see if there's something like a master's or a PhD in online behavior? Because physical environments shape our behaviors, and so therefore, I would assume, would virtual environments. And there wasn't anything. UX hadn't come out yet as a term. Human-computer interaction was a field, but I wanted something that was a bit more integrating of different perspectives like linguistics and social psychology and cultural psychology. So I thought I'll just write a book. And, with a sort of brazen naivety, which I think is a superpower actually of my 20s. I was like, fuck it, I'll write a book. How hard can it be? And it was hard, but it was also rewarding. And I got an amazing editor whose partner was a digital marketer. And he was the one that said, I think there's something here. And so Pearson gave me a book deal and it became quite successful in the business world. And so that launched my speaking career. And on the side of that, I have still kept a live connection with my music and art, although it did kind of fade away for a bit. But then having gone through burnout after the second edition of my first book, which is like rewriting a whole book. Well, it was a whole new book. And then going through an amicable, but still, painful divorce. I came to Barcelona for sabbatical for 3 months to study at Barcelona Academy of Art through someone who'd shown me what they'd done while learning with them. And that was 8 years ago. And I did the full 3.5 years training in realist painting and drawing. And I have now finally, after years of grappling, and it really has been years, found for the first time in my life some feeling of balance where the grounding of my weekly rhythm, my monthly rhythm is in art, is in painting practice. And that's then also feeding into the talks and the thinking around AI because it raises such existential questions. What's left for humans if, and it's a big if to me, we can come to that if you like later, but if AI can reproduce at a speed and scale and reliability, which currently it can't, the kinds of stuff that humans can do, where's our value? And then, of course, it has to be something which is interior and subjective and intersubjective and relational and in touch with the sacred and the numinous and the living web of which we are a part. And so for me, it kind of comes at this perfect time where it's infusing everything that I do. And that's why when you and I met and we had this kind of zingy conversation. Yes.
It's a beautiful segue to everything that we are going to be talking about. I'm covered in goosebumps, actually. And I think it's because I love how you've just explained your journey, but like an orchestra. And so there's different instruments that have played over the years and they've kind of been independent at times, but suddenly when they all come together, you've got this beautiful melody. And I just think, isn't it amazing that aren't you so lucky that you have that vision and you can see that and you can see how all of the instruments actually complement one another. Over time, that melody is going to change. and it's going to evolve, right? And based on whatever you then focus on more. And it's funny because I talk a lot about puzzle pieces, and I've always just seen my life as a puzzle, but almost I've never really known what the image is that I'm creating, but I can see that the puzzle pieces fit together. And it's almost like I don't even want to know what that image is, because it's not like I'm trying to fill an already existing puzzle.
Right.
That's kind of come from something else. It's kind of, I'm seeing how the puzzle pieces fit together, and it's creating this beautiful art that's going to evolve over time. But it's so important that these puzzle pieces do fit in, and that we are creating sort of mosaic of life, be it music or art or whatever it is. And I just think it's so key for people to realize that whatever it is that you've done, nothing's wasted, nothing's lost. Even if the experience has been difficult, it does fit together, and it's created who you are to then respond at this moment, which in our case, I think we're starting to see how what we've been building over the last 20, however many years, now it's kind of coming to a place where it's more important than ever that we fit these puzzle pieces together and put this symphony together. And,
absolutely.
You know, you talk about reclaiming agency and creativity in an age of AI.
Yeah.
And, you know, what does that mean to you? And what inspired you to explore this now?
So I think one of the things that I've always been, I think, vigilant of are grand claims, especially by people who on high will just say, this is how it is. Take it at face value. It's like the Wizard of Oz. There's all this kind of smokes, mirrors and glamour. And I don't know, maybe it's because my dad's we did engineering, was a physics teacher, he taught me physics. But I always I'm like, okay, what's the substance of what you're saying? How actually does the story that you're telling represent or not the situation that we actually find ourselves facing? And so when it comes to AI, and I'm not a technologist, I mean, I developed websites back in the day, but that's like basic HTML, and I couldn't do it now unless I refreshed. So I come at this much more from a humanistic perspective or a behavioral perspective and a creative perspective. And so thinking about all of the hype that's been propagated around AI and all of the things that its champions say it can do, you've got to ask some of the questions, like things like, okay, well, if, for instance, and I like using metaphors because then it kind of lands it somehow differently in the body. So if you went to the doctor and you said, okay, I've had this abdominal pain for 3 months now, and I don't know what it is, and you tell them your symptoms, and then she says to you, okay, I think it's this. And if you say to her, are you sure? And then she goes, oh, no, actually, no, maybe you're right. Maybe I'm not sure. Maybe it's this. And then you go, oh, are you sure it's that? She goes, oh, no, maybe I'm not. This is what AI is like now. It's just not reliable. And there are specific tasks for which this is true. So for instance, there was a brilliant post that came out just recently about Grok 3 by Gary Marcus, who's a cognitive scientist who sold his first AI company to Uber and is a skeptical voice, but a very sober voice when it comes to bursting the AI hype bubble. And he shared this on his Substack. And he was saying that he gave Grok 3 a prompt, which was something along the lines of, create an image of the word Chattanooga circling the vowels, right? So it managed to get the image with the words right, which is remarkable because a lot of time people don't. But then the circles are just in random ass places on the image. And you could say, oh, yes, okay, but generative AI, da, 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 da. In the same breath, you have people like the CEO of Suno, this music making app. And I was listening to music with a friend this morning. His partner created this extraordinary song using AI, and it's convincing. And at the same time, you've got the CEO of Suno saying, well, yeah, people don't really want to spend the time and trouble creating music anymore. And I'm thinking, okay, hold on. We have, in some cases, extraordinary capabilities to play with. And I don't want to poo-poo that because it's really important. It's exciting. And also some flaws which are extraordinarily basic, like reliability, interoperability. The fact that the training data that people have accessed, most of it was stolen. And then suddenly OpenAI goes, oh, but DeepSeek has accessed and, all the stuff that was in our model. It's like, well, where did you get how many legal cases currently is OpenAI facing for exactly, or not quite exactly, but basically the same thing?
Very, very quickly, I wanted to add to this. New Year's, I had the most incredible New Year's with friends just down the street. And I had this 91-year-old who'd written 75 books. And he was there and he had come from Rio de Janeiro. I'm like, oh my God. And he's singing and it was amazing. And then another 85-year-old who'd written 56 books. And then this friend of mine who she had organized it, and she's a lawyer. We were sitting there talking about humanity in this day and age and what this all looks like. And she was reflecting on AI in the legal realm. And it was really interesting because she said, no, AI is interesting because, of course, you can do some background research and it's fine. But she said, if you go to AI and you say, okay, for this case, for example, let's say somebody jumped over a wall,
they got badly injured from jumping over the wall and going into someone else's house to rob it, but they got injured jumping over the wall. In theory, the area that person has fallen into, in theory, I'm responsible for the well-being of that individual who fell over trying to rob my house. Anyway, and so she said, there are precedents like this. And so she would put into AI, okay, somebody has injured themselves. Obviously, they are guilty, but we need to find examples that have argued against this. Can you give me 4 examples? So AI will give 4 examples, but she knows that there's only 3. She only knows that because she's a human and she actually knows that, but she has to have had the research to know. So she says, I want 4 examples. AI will give 4 examples. So then she looks at those and then she could just take those and those would be 4, but actually one of them is not real. And actually she has to discern which ones actually are real and which one isn't. And so then you ask it again, but hold on a second. I think that there's only 3. And then AI says, oh yes, you're absolutely right. There are only 3. These are the 3. And then she goes, but hold on a second. You know what? Now that I remember and then you have to keep plugging in the examples and oh no, you're right. No, absolutely. I'm sorry. I have an error. This is the correct answer.
And also there was a case, I remember reading in one of my talks, I forget which one, but it was a case to decide how reliable AI was. And that was in question. And the person who was making a case for it not being reliable had used one of these platforms to help him build the case. And it was then, and it included one of these, I call them fabrications because hallucination is a tricky term and it implies sentience. And I think it's misleading. So he had basically generated fabrications like the kind that you just described, the 4th example, when really in actuality there's only 3. And so the case got thrown out. And it's like, well, this is exactly the problem that we're facing. And it's not to say that it can't be useful. And this is the crucial thing. If you have domain expertise, you can use it and it can broaden your perspectives, but you have to have the domain expertise to be able to discern the sometimes quite small and not as perceptible mistakes that it's making so that you don't end up imbibing those mistakes or like putting that into whatever you're creating and then having a compounding effect off the back of it. And one of the issues with some of this deep research, quote unquote, is that the mistakes are now less obvious than they were before, but they're still there. And so if you don't know what you're looking for, it's almost worse because instead of fishing out, if you think of a mistake like a plastic bottle, instead of fishing out an obvious plastic bottle, you're now dealing with microplastics, but the cumulative effect is still really bad. And so I think there's also that question of how do we use AI with discernment and critical thinking and domain expertise, which means you can't have organizations and schools allowing people to outsource their cognitive processes to AI because it then diminishes the very skills, capacities, and grit that we need that will help us to discern and advance good use of AI.
That then brings us to this next stage, right? And where things are going. So there's this boom of AI. It's a great tool and we can't deny that. So it's a great tool. It's a tool that helps us in our day-to-day stuff, but we also need to have these human skills to kind of create that connection between the machine and, well, the organization or the people and the people within that organization. So reflecting on the World Economic Forum, because there was the job report survey, whatever it's called, just came out. And I mean, it's really interesting because, you've got the understanding AI skills, but you've got critical thinking, empathy, flexibility, resilience. I mean, they are right up there, in the top 5. And upskilling as a strategy within a company is like number 1. So interestingly, you've got the upskilling, of course, for things like AI and those kind of skills, but you need to have these skills embedded in these leaders in order to be able to drive these companies and create these teams and create these connections and to be able to see opportunities and to be able to innovate. So I'm just curious from your point of view, why do you think that these skills are more important than ever? What does that look like in your world, in these conversations that you're having? And I know that you're talking about specifically empathy, and that's a fascinating one because you have these conversations with people who are huge AI promoters, and everyone's like, it's empathetic, and you can have an AI psychologist. We've got people who are going to AI for psychology and to help them with their problems. And so that suggests that there's a bit of empathy there. But I just wonder, where does the human come in all of this?
So there's lots of really important things that I think are worth picking out. So empathy is one, agency is the other, interbeing, also historic versus present and future conceptions. So let's start with empathy. So one of the things I think when people talk about empathy is useful thinking about it in terms of its structures. And I take kind of a psychological lens because that was my background. And so thinking about empathy in the psychological research, you can dig in And people talk about 3 distinct structures for empathy, distinct kinds. So you've got cognitive, which is perspective taking or fantasizing. It's taking someone else's ideas or putting yourself in their shoes. Or when you read some fiction, it's kind of placing yourself intellectually into someone else's situation. Then there's emotional empathy, which is when we usually fairly subconsciously, or at least initially subconsciously, and then we feel the sensation in our body, but it's automatic, identifying and responding to someone else's feeling. So if I see someone, and different people kind of, it's also connected with things like mirror neurons. So how much when someone injures themselves, if you're sensitive, like, you'll probably see it coming and you'll wince, like you'll feel an echo of that sensation in your body, which can also be great for pleasure, but usually it's pain, right? So if someone's tripping up or smashes themselves on the head, like you're going to wince. So that's emotional empathy. I'm jumping ahead. That's somatic empathy. Somatic is when it's embodied, but emotional empathy is when you experience someone's pain because you hear someone sobbing or you feel them expand with joy and you can see their gesture. So there's 3 different kinds. There's the embodied somatic one, there's the emotional part of it, and then there's also the intellectual part of it. And when it comes to getting a sense of rapport with technology, the reason that we fall for it is because machines, when designed to emulate human patterns of speech, so natural language patterns. So basically, ELIZA, which was the first NLP that was designed by Joseph Weizenbaum back in the 60s in the AI lab at MIT, she was designed off Rogerian psychotherapy structures. So kind of like, if you said to me, I'm feeling quite anxious, I'd say, okay, why are you feeling anxious? And you might say, because I'm worried that my partner's taking a flight and he's going to get injured or something, whatever it is. And then I might say, oh, I'm sorry to hear that you're worried about your partner taking a flight and he might get injured. Tell me more. So these basic patterns that have been in use for 80 years trick us through cognitive performance, so basically performing this cognitive empathy, into thinking that there is some sort of empathy there, but we're projecting that meaning. So it's performance and projection. It performs empathy, we project meaning, interiority, sentience, etc. And that's dangerous because if you don't actually have an internal moral compass, which machines don't, it's basically a system of probabilities and tokens and is not really understanding what you're saying because it's just the next most probable word off of a sequence from all training data that it's been kind of trained on. We infer all of that meaning and interiority, but in actuality, it's a show, it's a display, it's a mimicking of human patterns of speech, which imply an interior experience. And so we've got to be quite careful with that. And then you see this play out, like with character AI last year, there was a huge case with Sewell, this young man who took his own life. And you see this in different places where people develop a parasocial relationship or a sort of a synthetic intimacy with, which for the person themselves feels, and this is a problem, feels very real, but it's not. It's an intimacy economy where you are preying on people's emotion and desire to connect in order to capitalize on their attention. And it has real world consequences. And so our desire to connect, our hardwiring for empathy and for getting close to other people, if we're not vigilant and don't put in secure guardrails, appropriate guardrails, it's very easier for us to get hooked into systems that then don't serve us and that can cause a huge amount of harm. And I think part of that is also the ways in which these systems are designed to be really anthropomorphic. So it's very easy because we're so used to texting and emails and written language. It's very easy for us to communicate via chat, quote unquote, with a bot and then infer sentience. So it's complicated.
If we look at the conversation about CSR 20 years ago when I started doing what I'm doing, and that conversation a long time ago was, it's the right thing to do. Business needs to just be good because it's the right thing to do. And of course, that never really takes off and no one really does anything because it's the right thing to do. And it's the same thing with diversity. It's the right thing to do to have, a diverse workforce. And of course, there's all this crazy political stuff around that right now. Mm-hmm. But we also know the stats of all of this. We know the stats of diversity. We know the stats that if you have people who think differently on a team, that team is going to be better than if you have a whole lot of people who look the same, from the same age, from the same background. I mean, it's obvious, the stats prove that. So therefore, it's more competitive. It's the same thing with companies that, being nice and kind and, benevolent leadership. Before, that was kind of seen as it's just the right thing to do. Well, actually, we know that engagement proves results. So if people are more engaged at work, so therefore they have people who listen to them and they understand them, we know that the results are better. We know that they're 23% more profitable companies if they have people who are more engaged. People therefore will be more engaged if people feel like they're part of something. Yeah. So anything, any decision, people are never going to do anything just because it's the right thing to do. They're going to do it because there's an actual business reason for it. So if we're looking at, where the world is currently going, and we've got all this hype around AI, and again, it is definitely a tool. I use it. I find it really useful, but I have never fit into a box. My business is in England. My bank account is in England. I live in Brazil. I never fit into a box. So whenever I talk to any company, the bots can never help me. And I'm constantly agent, I need to speak to an agent. I just it never works because I don't fit into an algorithm. I never have. And if I also then take that one step further and I think, okay, I wouldn't pet a robot dog. I just wouldn't. If I had a robot dog, I wouldn't kiss it on the nose and pet it. I just wouldn't because it's really hard to create that connection with something that's a machine. It does stuff for us. So it can go and get my paper for me. And actually in your presentation, you talked about, it's got the robot arm for doing, there's skills that they can do for us, but that connection and affection and trust, it's very hard to feel that towards a machine. And I just think, where are things going? If we're wanting to just fill our workforce with a whole lot of machines, does that bode well for the future of business? If we need people to connect to a place and it's not just about skills, it's about people actually working towards something, wanting to work towards something. That only happens when there's a connection. That only happens when I feel a part of something. And that feeling a part of something is never going to come truly from machines. It might be able to sort of fantasize something, but really in my pit of my stomach, I'm not going to want to have a conversation about machines weekend. It's just not going to make me feel excited.
So I was raised on Star Trek from a very young age. And one of my favorite characters is Data, who is a humanoid machine who strives to become and dreams of becoming more human. And the fact that he dreams and strives to become more human indicates a sense of interiority and agency. And agency being something which you hear a lot. So thinking about, and I'm going to come to the point about belonging and connection and culture and psychological safety, but this sense that AI or embodied AI, so machine, robots that have systems on board that can then, for instance, do triage in a hospital. And there are examples where machines can be used helpfully in that way. But whenever we have, so far, when we've got disembodied AI, everything's in a substrate like our laptop, but it doesn't move around and interact with us like a humanoid shape, whatever. Whether it's on our laptop, in our phone, or it's a humanoid robot that's doing triage in a hospital, the agency that it possesses is based on a reactive exchange in the sense that it's humans that will prompt it to do something. Whereas you and I talking, yes, we're in constant relationship to another. We're this kind of hyper individualistic perspective of every person for themselves. No, if we don't exist, then I don't exist. I only exist in relationship to the world, the food, the system, and the web of life. And so thinking about agency, we relate to things outside of us, but the agentic quality in humans comes from something that arises within us. So it's this idea of one who acts, if you sort of trace it back to medieval Latin. And yet when it comes to robots or AI, it's about responding to a prompt that a human has given. Now, you mentioned earlier about the physical contact of, so for instance, co-regulation. If you have a pet or a loved one who is in a state of stress and you need to find a way to help bring them back into a regulated state to calm down without going, calm down, because that never works, then you can either stroke the pet, or if it's a child or a friend, you can hold them and you can breathe together and you can regulate and you can bond. Because in mammals, this is one of the beauties of being embodied, right? And the fact of the matter is that we share that with other mammals. We also share that in natural environments. If you go into a forest, you can, in some ways, you co-regulate with the forest through chemical exchange. And it's slightly different then, and it's not called co-regulation. But my point with machines is that if you have a workforce in which you have a few machines dotted about and they're helping to support the work of humans, I imagine that would be a good cultural fit as long as it was the kind of organization in which that's expected and that's a norm. If you end up in an organization where there are very few people and there's precarity around whether or not your job will be displaced or replaced by a robot, how are you going to cultivate psychological safety for people to be able to take risks, to challenge one another compassionately, robustly, to innovate, to imagine, to think about how is our product or our approach responding to the zeitgeist? Machines can't do that. Even with the most up-to-date AI platform currently, it's working off of historical data. It's working off of the historical to collapse possible paths into the future to serve you that which is probable, which is incomplete and will always be incomplete because it's working off of stuff that already exists. Now, you could say the same for humans, and yet whenever we've had artistic or scientific breakthroughs or phase transitions in entire systems, for instance, when the chick is in the egg and it's eaten all of the white of the egg and its gullet is just strong enough to be able, or its beak to break through, it doesn't know that there is a world outside of its egg, which has become a jail because it can't eat anymore and it's too big, and until it breaks through. So that's a phase transition. And I think that we see in humans, that we don't necessarily know how to move from one thing to another, but we interrelate with our environment so that imagination, resilience happen. Like all of these things can happen in a way that is deeply entangled with the living world. I don't see any evidence of that in robots. And I think if we replace entire workforces or large proportions of the workforce with robots, we are diminishing the possibility for us to dream into the future, to innovate, to respond when crises come, when chaos happens. There's this idea listening to an amazing episode this morning of The Great Simplification, talking about complex systems and chaos theory and mathematics. The idea being that you can only predict specific outcomes with data when it's fixed. And of course, as life changes, data changes, and then the predictions become less useful. And so as living organisms, we're constantly in this state of dynamism and response and sensing and predicting and agency and changing our environment and responding to one another. Machines are working off an abstract model of a world which has a lag time to it and cannot possibly represent the complexity of what it is to be alive.
I wonder, how can leaders then ensure that technology is used to enhance human potential rather than diminish it? And what are the roles? And again, this is, where I don't expect you to necessarily have all of the sort of concrete answers, but just from the conversations that you're having, as someone who's listening to this, as somebody who is in a workforce where these are conversations and everything's happening so quickly, what can you say to the listeners?
First thing I would say is slow down. There's a lot of things that are happening, and I will share with you a bunch of resources. I've got a page where I've got a dynamic list of resources of the shows that I follow, the books that I think are worth reading.
That would be
the
so
newsletters.
I'm putting that all in the notes. Yeah.
Yeah, I will share this with you. Mostly just because, and this is from people who are working in the field, like I'm not a deep expert technologically, but you want to be able to have a range of voices so that when people come out with this sense of everything's moving so fast, it's like, well, how many times has Musk come out and said, oh, we're going to have self-driving cars every year for how many of the last years? And has it translated into reality in large part? No. What about the robots that have been put on display on stages? And one of them, I remember a podcast recently, was being remote controlled by people. So there's a lot of bollocks around machines and AI. And there's a lot of extraordinary things. Now, the main thing to say is test it. We have to get comfortable testing these things. Don't be scared of it. See if it can work for you. Remember, you have domain expertise. One of the best examples I encountered of a company that was taking a forward stance towards working with AI. It's brilliant on so many levels. They got everyone in their different teams to come together and they said, right, we're going to together figure out what are the problems that we'd most like to solve. And we'll compile a list and we'll pick off, let's say, the top 5. And then we're going to do a series of sprints using the AI tools available to us to see which of these AI tools are the appropriate ones to help us in solving these specific problems. And there were some that really did. And there was a lot of ones that really didn't. So it's about creating a culture of experimentation where the tools are not some big thing and, oh my God, you're getting left behind. It's like, that's not helpful. Yes, there are tools. Yes, they can be extraordinary. Play with Midjourney, play with Suno, try Perplexity, try and catch out these machines, see where the reliability issues lie, and then understand where it can be really adding value. So taking minutes from meetings, brilliant. As a sparring partner to help offer a different perspective when you're coming up with ideas, also brilliant. Even for things like research, I sometimes will use Perplexity and Claude to come up with suggestions of psychological principles that I may have, come up about, but I've forgotten who wrote it and the rest of it. But because I've got a practice, again, it's about that thing of, okay, how much is this really reliable? How much can I actually take it at its value? And so testing, having a test, and then seeing as things come out, listening to the different critical voices who will be able to help you distinguish fact from fiction.
Really would love your thoughts on the whole and you touched on it at the beginning of when we started talking, but the side of art and AI. You're a painter, you're a musician, you're an author, creative writing, photography. And again, in your presentation, you showed, what is the AI cat?
Yeah.
And so the thing is AI is starting to be able to do things, but you touched on how your friend was like, well, people don't want to create music anymore. Well, yeah, they do. I mean, I live in Olinda, which is, I mean, this is like the music center of one of the music centers of Brazil. I mean, some of the most famous singers come out of this place and you hear music all the time. And I mean, you're a musician. So you've got people who are making AI art now. And would I hang an AI art in my house? Like, I don't know if I would I do that? So I just wonder when we're looking at the future of many of these professions, do you see the role of human creativity evolving in this landscape? What are your thoughts on this, being an artist?
So there's a couple of things that I think that's worth highlighting from the outset, which is that, and you mentioned this right at the beginning, and I'm very much on the same page as you with this, that the flourishing of life happens at its fullest when there's a diversity. Any way you want to look at it. So it's like this abundance edge effect that when you get different cultures coming together, yes, it's more complicated and requires greater attention and insight and skill to be able to manage difference. But I kind of think that's one of the joys of being human is growth and deepening into one's potential and connecting to others and expanding what's possible. Like that's the position I like to hold when it comes to difference. So when it comes to AI and to creativity and to art and diversity, a couple of things to note. Looking at the ways in which AI is created. So if we're thinking about just things like Gen AI, even though the training data might have come from the entirety of the internet, which is mostly English speaking for American companies, there is research that suggests that the ideology that's implicit within the model is usually very closely matching to the ideology of the people who've created. So that strips out immediately that plurality. And if you reduce plurality and you reduce creative tensions, how good is the outcome going to be? So I think there's something about creative tension, about growth. And I think when it comes to the role of people in the future using AI, and I've seen really extraordinary examples. Like one of my good friends uses AI for his art, but he's using Midjourney himself. He has domain expertise. He's training it on 19th century art, which is outside of copyright. He's prompting it with skill because he's a developer and with his realist painting technique because he's got 10 years under his belt as a professional teacher in this domain. So like then magic absolutely can happen. And I've seen it. It's just extraordinary. And so it's not to dissuade people. I think we need more people who are literate in how AI can be harnessed and do it well, more literate in terms of what to believe, what not to believe. The piece around relationship is really important, zeitgeist reading, and also to imagine what kind of world do we want. Like there's this idea of the three horizons where you have the current trajectory that we're on and then dreaming into the future. What would it be if we lived in a world where AI was able to solve some of our most intractable problems like issues around energy or access to food and to medicine, a dignified life? If it did do a lot of the labor, where would that take us? And maybe it takes us to a place where we can spend more time exploring meaning and connection and beauty and wondering at the extraordinary mystery of life. And I know it's idealistic, but unless we have some kind of constellation that we're working towards, dreaming towards, that is just, if we get swept along in these really unimaginative stories about how AI is just going to dominate everyone, it's just such an old story. It doesn't work for anyone. It's really extractive. And that's not the kind of world that I want to live in, is it?
No,
do you want to live there?
Know. And it's so, for me, I think there was a word that you said that just sums up all of this. And it's growth. Because it's so easy to say, write me an essay on whatever, ChatGPT, and out comes sort of a 1,500 word essay on whatever it is. And then, press send and off it goes. But in order to be able to have that uncomfortable feeling of coming up with ideas, even like coming up with the ideas, AI can help, but it's sort of understanding how to sort of put those sentence structures together and writing it and like thinking it. And as you write it, you think about what it is that you're wanting to say and what is it, and that critical thinking. I'm terrified for the younger generation who can just have like the easy way out, because if you just go for the easy way out with any of this, we're just going to go downhill very, very quickly. And it's
already happening. There's research that came out from Microsoft and Carnegie Mellon, and it was on the impact of generative AI on critical thinking, self-reported reductions in cognitive effect and confidence effects from a survey of knowledge workers. And then another one that was really interesting, Elizabeth Loftus and her peers did some AI research, and they found that the output of LLMs can instill false beliefs in their users. So imagine that all of this content, perhaps that we're reading on LinkedIn or social media, becomes AI generated, and suddenly you're voting differently and you're buying into completely AI generated content, or you're relating to someone that is an AI avatar that you have no idea isn't a real person, and you're starting to form bonds, and then you're more easily manipulable, or you're listening to an AirPod which reads your biometrics and you've signed up to a particular program that means that you get money off, but then just as you fall asleep, it can read that you're falling asleep, and that's when it serves you the ads. So then you're in a hypnagogic state and you're being more subjective to, like, there's all sorts of crazy shit, and cognitive liberty is another big one, maybe for another day, but like, we need to steer the ship collectively, and that means bringing all these voices together so that we can actually have a conversation and not be afraid to not know. This is the thing, and especially in organizations, if you're a leader listening to this, or if you're someone who's just starting out, you've just entered a junior position, speak up, ask the difficult questions, because so many people are terrified about what's happening, don't know where to start. And it's only if we speak up and admit that we don't know, and we start having a dialogue around this, that we're actually going to be able to come to much better outcomes. That would be the biggest takeaway for me.
Oh my God. I want to keep talking, and we're not.
I know, sorry.
Oh my God.
I feel like I'm so excited. I feel it's just been really garbled.
No, I've just got, no, it hasn't at all. It's just, I want to keep going. And what can you share with us that can help, I don't know, summarize what we've talked about, or that inspires you?
So there's a quote that's small enough that it fits in my mind without slipping away. And it was attributed to Anais Nin, but I'm not sure entirely that it comes from her, but I love the poetry of it. And it's this: and the day came when the risk to remain tight in the bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom. And I love that, because I feel like if we get granted the gift of life in a place where we are not in terrible precarity, we get invited back to that place again and again. It's like, and now where's that edge? And now how can I grow? How can I be kind to others? How can I be creative? How can I live and love in a way that is in service to the flourishing of life? And that, I think, is the greatest question we can ask.
I love Anais Nin. I have a few quotes from Anais Nin as well that are scattered throughout my book. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like to tell our listeners?
Yeah, I think it's very easy to feel overwhelmed and like you're drinking from a fire hose that's fast becoming like a dam that's just been unleashed upon you. I think we have to guard space and time off our devices, to be in conversation with people, to come home to ourselves, to one another. And it could be like going on a walk out in nature, or to the local garden, or having like just anchoring ourselves in the physical, because this is the only home that we have. And yes, technology is shaping rapidly the futures that are available to us. But if we can't root ourselves in that which we love most, we're not going to make wise decisions. So it's guarding time to be able to come home to practices that connect us with our love of the world. And so for me, it's conversations with you, conversations with loved ones, painting, music, eating. I love eating, going for a walk, hearing the birds. And these seem insignificant, but they are not. They are really the things that anchor us into a love of life. And so I think that, like, guard that, protect that. And then I'm very happy to share the resources, but then find some voices of people who are smart and thoughtful and a little acerbic, so you get a proper, kick. You're kind of jolted out of the main narratives that are jostled about, so that you can make up your own mind.
Oh my God, Nathalie, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for your wisdom and passion and thoughtfulness and kindness. Thank you for being here. I really, truly appreciate it.
Thanks. I just hope it wasn't too garbled.
It was not garbled. Until next time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, this is Philippa again. I hope you enjoyed listening. Now this is your chance to get involved with TIE. If you're looking to create better leaders, better companies, and a better world, that's just what we do by helping leaders tap into their greatest asset, their humanity. We have a number of corporate programs that impact a range of people, from individuals at a company to 500 people around a business. Or check out my book, Return on Humanity, Leadership Lessons from All Corners of the World. You'll find the answers to how business can truly become a positive force while remaining at the forefront of competition. You can find all the information you need on all of this at tieleadership.com. Get in touch and I can explain more. A huge thanks to Behena Vieira for co-producing this with me and for creating the music. I hope we'll meet up again soon.